Hello, today's topic is the reciprocal meaning or use of the mediopassive in modern Greek. It's a topic I would think it's mostly suitable for people who are at B2 level at least, but also people who are at a lower level can benefit from understanding how understanding a bit better how this reciprocal, what this reciprocal meaning is and what the mediopassive voice is. So first let's start with the mediopassive voice. The mediopassive voice, it's a grammatical voice in modern Greek that is called this way because it is a merger of two voices, two grammatical voices that exist in ancient Greek. That is the middle voice, that was something similar to reflexive in terms of the meaning. Think of verbs like prepararse, levantarse in Spanish and other languages coming from Latin. They're usually called pronominal verbs in these languages. And a merger of this voice, the middle voice, and of the passive voice. The passive voice is very straightforward. It would be like, a man was bitten by a dog, or a chicken was eaten by a man, this kind of thing, okay? However, before I move to however, it's pretty easy in modern Greek to recognize this mediopassive voice because the verbs have a very different set of endings. So the endings that the verbs have in the mediopassive and the endings that the verbs have in the active voice are very different, entirely different. And usually Greek students at school are taught to recognize these verbs by the first person singular present indicative, which is me, M-A-I, me alpha iota. Yeah. So whether it is αγαπιέμαι, ομιλούμε, οδηγούμε, σκέφτομαι, it's all in me. Okay. And probably the most famous verb in this group, although it is irregular, would be είμαι, which in Greek, grammatically speaking, belongs to the mediopassive, the verb to be. So, this is in terms of how to recognize it. You recognize it by the very different set of endings that you have, many of them ending with alpha iota, AI, alpha iota. And I have to say here, it usually takes students a lot of time to first learn to recognize these endings as ending of verbs and then learn to master them. And once you master the present, then you have to master the past, and it's quite a task. But at the same time that people do that, and as I said, I recognize it is something that takes time and effort, it's good to keep in mind how this mediopassive voice is used, because very often at the beginning people tend to think that it is either only passive. So passive would be again, just to explain quickly, the difference between the active, which is a dog bites a man, and then the passive, a man is being bitten by a dog. This would be the passive, right? When you make the object, you make it subject. Or they think it's a reflexive, what we usually call reflexive, I shave myself, I get shaved, or, I wash myself, I look myself in the mirror, all these verbs that go with myself, like πλένομαι, ντύνομαι, σκουπίζομαι, σηκώνομαι, στέκομαι, etc., βλέπομαι, etc. But there are many more meanings, many more different possible meanings within this mediopassive voice. And also, here it's important to also recognize that not all verbs have the same sets of meanings. For instance, if you take
one of the most irregular ones, βαράω, in the active voice,
Now, the grammatical equivalent of varao in the active voice in the mediopassive is obviously varieme, which has a completely different meaning. It's to feel bored, to be bored. That's an extreme case, and this verb in the mediopassive has only one meaning. I suppose, yeah. You could say something like βαριούνται ένας τον άλλον. They make each other boring. But anyway, I digress. So not all meanings, not all mediopassive verbs can be reciprocal or reflexive or passive. Some are one thing, some others are another. Some have many different possibilities, but it depends on the context. So today I want to focus specifically on the reciprocal because it's less known, and actually it's also less used if you compare it with the reflexive verbs or the passive verbs. It's usually less used. What is the meaning of reciprocal? This is quite straightforward. It means each other. When you translate in English using each other, then the meaning in Greek is reciprocal. A nice example would be ο Πέτρος και η Μαρία αγαπιούνται. Okay, Petros and Mary love each other. Αγαπιούνται. You could also say ο Πέτρος και η Μαρία μισιούνται θανάσιμα. They hate each other mortally. Βλέπονται, ο Πέτρος και η Μαρία βλέπονται συχνά. They meet each other or they look at each other often. Κοιτάζονται, they look at each other. Βρίζονται, they curse each other. Now notice here, in accordance to what I said before, because to my mind it's important to understand this is not some kind of, we're not talking about mathematics here. This is not predicate logic or anything like that. So, for instance, you have the verb βρίζω, and βρίζω has βρίζομαι, which is the mediopassive voice. But φωνάζω, for instance, doesn't have a mediopassive at all. That's just because, there is no φωνάζομαι. You can say με φωνάζουν, but there's no φωνάζομαι. Now, a last thing I want to mention regarding this topic is that this is one way to have a reciprocal meaning in modern Greek. Another way is, of course, to do it the same way as in English, to just say each other, ο ένας τον άλλον, for instance. Αγαπούν ο ένας τον άλλον, μισούν ο ένας τον άλλον, βλέπουν ο ένας τον άλλον, κοιτάζουν ο ένας τον άλλον, βρίζουν ο ένας τον άλλον. Now, notice here, if I have, let's say, Petros and Maria, like in the first example, they will still both, I will still use the masculine form in both cases. I will say, ο Πέτρος και η Μαρία αγαπούν ο ένας τον άλλον. It's impossible to say, ο ένας την άλλη. I cannot say. Η μία την άλλη is possible under certain circumstances, if I were to use feminine for both. But if I'm talking about a group that is mixed, I have to use masculine in both cases. And so, now this is of course interesting to know for verbs that have a mediopassive, like the ones I just mentioned, in which case you can use both. You can say βρίζονται, or you can say βρίζουν ένας τον άλλον. And then with the verbs like φωνάζονται that don't really have a mediopassive voice, then that's the only way you can have a reciprocal meaning, by saying φωνάζουν ένας τον άλλον. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening.